The Galactic Council had ruled for 3 million years, and they believed they knew what was best for everyone. 7 ancient species sat in the grand chamber on the station orbiting the dead star called Terminus. They made decisions that affected billions of lives across thousands of worlds. They decided who could advance and who must wait. They decided which technologies were safe and which were too dangerous. They decided everything because they had always decided everything. When humanity discovered faster than light travel in the year 2847, the Council took notice. The humans were young and loud and curious about everything. They asked questions that made the Council members uncomfortable. They wanted to know why certain star systems were forbidden. They wanted to know why some technologies were restricted. They wanted to know who gave the Council the right to rule. Commander Jake Morrison was 35 years old and he loved his job. He commanded the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge, a ship designed to map unknown regions of space. His crew of 47 people were scientists and engineers and dreamers who believed the universe held wonders waiting to be discovered. They had been in space for 8 months, studying a strange energy signature near the Veil Nebula. On the morning everything changed, Jake was drinking coffee in his quarters when the alarm sounded. He ran to the bridge and found his second officer, Lieutenant Amy Chen, staring at her console with wide eyes. The star map was changing. Every star was moving, not drifting slowly like stars should move, but jumping instantly to new positions. The navigation system was screaming errors. The computer could not understand what it was seeing. Jake ordered everyone to their stations, but before anyone could respond, the lights flickered. The artificial intelligence that ran the ship systems began speaking in a language no one recognized. The voice was cold and mechanical and wrong. Then the voice stopped. The entire ship went silent except for emergency power. Amy looked at Jake with fear in her eyes and said that every human colony had disappeared from the star charts. Earth was gone. All the settlements humanity had built over the past century were simply not there anymore. Jake told her to run diagnostics, but he knew something terrible was happening. He could feel it in his bones. Across the galaxy, the same thing was happening to every human. On the colony world of New Boston, 5 million people were going about their daily lives when reality shifted. A farmer named Carl was plowing his field when his tractor stopped working. The power grid failed. Every piece of technology that humans had built began to malfunction. People looked up at the sky and saw that the stars were in the wrong positions. On the orbital station guarding the mining colony of Prosperity, Captain Nick Torres watched his sensors go blank. One moment he could see the planet below and the fleet of transport ships. The next moment everything was gone. His crew rushed to fix the systems, but nothing worked. They were floating in empty space with failing life support. In a research facility on the edge of known space, Dr. Lisa Grant was studying ancient artifacts when her equipment died. She had been examining strange crystalline structures that her team had found in the ruins of a dead civilization. The crystals were called anchor stones, and they seemed to exist outside normal physics. Lisa had been so fascinated by them that she had sent fragments to other research stations and colonies as samples. When the power failed, Lisa grabbed one of the anchor stones and felt it grow warm in her hand. The crystal began to glow with a soft blue light. Around her, the other scientists were panicking, but Lisa felt strangely calm. She looked at the stone and understood that something impossible was happening. Reality itself was being rewritten. The Galactic Council had deployed a weapon they called the Revision Protocol. It was ancient technology from a civilization that existed before the current universe. The weapon could change the past by altering quantum states at the fundamental level. It could make things that existed stop existing. It could erase entire species from history. The Council had debated for months about what to do with humanity. The humans spread too fast. They colonized worlds that should have killed them. They survived in environments that would destroy other species. They made friends with primitive cultures that the Council had written off as worthless. Worst of all, they kept asking dangerous questions. Some Council members argued that humanity should be guided slowly. Others said they should be contained. But the eldest member, a being named Archon Vel, who had lived for 8,000 years, said that humanity was a threat that would only grow worse. He proposed using the Revision Protocol. He said it had been done before to other dangerous species. He said it was necessary for the greater good. The vote was close, but the decision was made. Humanity would be erased. Every human would cease to exist. Every colony would vanish. Earth itself would be removed from reality. The universe would be rewritten so that humanity had never evolved, had never left their world, had never existed at all. The revision protocol swept across the galaxy at the speed of thought. It touched every human mind and every human creation. It reached back through time and began erasing. People vanished in mid-sentence. Ships disappeared from space. Buildings faded like they were never built. Within hours, humanity was gone. But the Council had made a mistake. They did not know about the anchor stones. They did not know that Lisa had distributed fragments across dozens of human settlements. The stones existed outside normal time, and they created bubbles of protection around anyone who touched them. Jake Morrison stood on his bridge holding a fragment that one of his scientists had brought aboard months ago. Around him, his crew flickered in and out of existence. Some of them vanished completely. Others remained solid. The ones who remained were the ones who had touched the stone during their research. 47 people became 23. Then 23 became 18. Finally, the flickering stopped and Jake counted his crew. 15 people remained, including himself. They were still here, but they should not be. The universe insisted they did not exist. Their ship was a ghost floating in space. Their names were erased from every record. Their families were gone. Earth was gone. Everything humanity had built was gone. Amy Chen was crying at her station. The young lieutenant had lost her parents and her brother and her home. Jake wanted to comfort her, but he had lost people too. Everyone had lost someone. They were survivors of an extinction that should have been absolute. Jake looked at the anchorstone fragment in his hand and made a decision. If the universe thought humanity was dead, then humanity would haunt the universe. They would survive in the gaps of reality. They would hide in the places between. They would learn and adapt and grow stronger. The Council had tried to erase humanity, but they had only made humanity invisible. And an invisible enemy was the most dangerous kind. The first week was chaos and confusion and fear. Jake Morrison kept his crew busy with tasks because busy people had less time to fall apart. They ran diagnostics on systems that barely worked. They tried to call for help on communication channels that no longer existed. They searched for other survivors and found only silence. The horizon's edge drifted through space like a forgotten dream. Other ships passed nearby, but their sensors could not detect the human vessel. Jake watched a massive cargo hauler fly within 100 meters and knew the aliens aboard had no idea he was there. His ship existed in a strange state between real and unreal. The hull was solid. The air was breathable. But to the rest of the universe, they were invisible. Lieutenant Amy Chen figured out how to use the anchorstone fragments to send messages. She discovered that the crystals created a network outside normal space. If two people both held fragments, they could communicate regardless of distance. It was slow and difficult, but it worked. Amy spent days sending out signals and hoping someone would answer. On the 9th day, someone did. A crackling voice came through the makeshift system, and Amy almost cried with relief. It was Captain Helen Price from the science vessel Discovery. Her ship had survived with 32 crew members. They were trapped in deep space with dwindling supplies, but they were alive. Amy and Helen talked for hours, sharing information and coordinates and hope. More survivors appeared over the following weeks. Captain Nick Torres contacted them from his orbital station. He had 60 people and plenty of supplies, but no ship. Dr. Peter Shaw called from a research facility that was slowly running out of power. A merchant captain named Greg found them while drifting near an asteroid field. A military officer named Lieutenant Sam Rivers made contact from a patrol boat. Lisa Grant became the center of the survivor network because she understood the anchor stones better than anyone. Her research facility had backup power, and she had been studying the crystals for years. She estimated that perhaps 10,000 humans had survived across the entire galaxy. 10,000 out of billions. Everyone else was simply gone, as if they had never been born. Lisa explained what she had learned. The revision protocol was designed to erase things completely, but the anchor stones existed outside the normal flow of time. They were relics from a universe that came before this one. When the protocol tried to erase people near the stones, it created a paradox. The universe said humans did not exist, but the stones said they did. The result was humans who existed in the gaps of reality. This meant they could interact with physical objects. They could eat food and breathe air and walk on solid ground. But electronic systems often failed to register them. Sensors saw glitches instead of people. Cameras showed static. Computer records would not save their names. They were ghosts that could touch the world but could not be recorded by it. Jake tested this carefully. He took a shuttle down to an abandoned mining outpost on a dead moon. He walked through the facility and touched equipment and opened doors. Everything worked. But when he tried to use a computer terminal, the screen showed error messages. When he spoke into a recording device, only white noise played back. He was there, but he also was not there. The survivors began to adapt. They learned to steal supplies from automated cargo ships. They learned to hide in places where sensors could not reach. They learned to sabotage systems in ways that looked like accidents. Being invisible gave them advantages, but it also meant they had to be clever. Helen Price proposed that they start gathering resources for a long-term survival plan. Her ship had working fabricators and she knew how to build things. Nick Torres offered his station as a meeting point because it had weapons and shields. Greg the merchant knew hidden trade routes and smuggler bases. Sam Rivers had military training and could teach combat tactics. Lisa coordinated everything from her research facility. She created a database of survivors and their skills. She mapped out safe locations where humans could hide. She studied the council records that her team had copied before the erasure and learned disturbing truths. The council was not benevolent. They hoarded resources in the forbidden zones. They suppressed technologies that would help younger species advance. They had used the revision protocol before on other civilizations. Lisa found records of at least 3 other species that had been erased from history. The council maintained their power by destroying anyone who threatened them. This discovery changed everything. The survivors were not just trying to stay alive. They were the only ones who knew the truth about the council. They were the only ones who could fight back. Jake called a meeting using the Anchorstone network. 15 different survivor groups connected through the crystals. Jake spoke plainly. He said they had 2 choices. They could hide forever and slowly die out, or they could use their invisibility as a weapon. They could become the resistance that the galaxy needed. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would fight back. They would start small and learn as they went. They would steal technology and sabotage council operations. They would help the species that the council oppressed. They would be the invisible hand that pushed the galaxy toward freedom. The first mission was simple. A council research station was conducting experiments on a primitive species without their consent. Sam Rivers led a team of 12 survivors to infiltrate the station. They moved through the facility like ghosts. Guards walked past them without noticing. Security cameras showed only static. Sam's team copied all the research data and then destroyed the equipment. They left no trace except broken machines. The council investigators found nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA, no evidence of who had attacked them. The security footage was corrupted. The logs showed no intruders. It was as if the universe itself had reached out and smashed their work. More missions followed. Helen's team sabotaged a mining operation that was poisoning a developing world. Greg smuggled weapons to rebels fighting council oppression. Lisa hacked into council databases and stole classified information. Every operation succeeded because no one could see them coming. Years passed and the survivors grew bolder. They established hidden bases in asteroid fields and nebulae. They reverse-engineered council technology and made it better. They recruited allies from species that humanity had befriended before the erasure. These allies did not remember humans, but they recognized kindred spirits. A young engineer named Krath from a bird-like species helped them build better ships. A warrior named Zell from a reptilian race trained them in combat. A scientist named Orin from an aquatic world shared forbidden knowledge. None of them knew they were helping humans. They only knew they were helping people who fought against injustice. Jake stood on the bridge of his ship 10 years after the erasure. His crew had grown from 15 to 50 as other survivors joined them. They had turned the horizon's edge into a warship that existed outside reality. They had struck the council hundreds of times and never been caught. Amy looked up from her station and smiled. She had found another survivor group near the core worlds. Humanity was scattered but growing stronger. They were learning to thrive in the shadows. The council had wanted to erase humanity. Instead, they had created the perfect insurgency. An enemy that could not be seen or tracked or stopped. An enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. Humanity had survived extinction and now they were becoming something the council would learn to fear. 20 years after the erasure, humanity had become something the galaxy had never seen before. They were not a civilization in the traditional sense. They had no homeworld and no government and no official territory. They were a network of survivors who existed in the spaces between reality. They were ghosts with purpose. Lisa Grant had aged well considering the stress of leading an invisible rebellion. Her hair had gone gray, but her mind was sharper than ever. She worked from her research facility, which had become a sanctuary for refugees and a command center for operations. The facility floated in a nebula where sensors could not penetrate, and only those with anchor stone fragments could find it. She had spent 2 decades studying the Council and their secrets. Her database contained millions of files stolen from classified archives. She knew things that would shake the galaxy to its core. The Council had not built their civilization through wisdom and patience. They had built it through suppression and fear and genocide. 17 times in their history they had used the revision protocol. 17 species erased because they asked too many questions or advanced too quickly, or simply existed in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lisa shared this information carefully with trusted allies. A journalist named Ven from a mammalian species published anonymous articles questioning Council authority. A politician named Cora from an insectoid race began pushing for reform in her government. A teacher named Milo from a crystalline species started educating young people about forgotten history. None of them knew they were working with humans. They only knew they were working with people who wanted change. Jake Morrison had become a legend among the survivors, even though most of the galaxy did not know he existed. His ship, the Horizon's Edge, had been rebuilt and upgraded dozens of times. It was now a vessel that could slip through Council defenses like water through fingers. His crew had grown to 70 people, all veterans of countless missions against impossible odds. Jake was planning the most ambitious operation yet. The Council maintained a massive archive on the station at Terminus, the Dead Star where they held their meetings. The archive contained the complete history of every species they had ever encountered. It also contained proof of their crimes. Lisa wanted that data, and Jake intended to get it for her. The mission required coordination between multiple survivor groups. Helen Price and her crew would create a distraction on the far side of the station. Nick Torres would jam communications from his position in a nearby asteroid field. Sam Rivers would lead a strike team through the ventilation systems. Greg would have a fast ship ready for extraction. Everything had to work perfectly, or they would all die. Jake briefed his team in the cargo bay of his ship. He explained the plan step by step. They would enter through a maintenance port that was rarely monitored. They would move through sections of the station that were between security zones. They would avoid direct confrontation because fighting would alert the entire station. They would copy the archive data and leave before anyone realized they had been there. Amy Chen raised her hand and asked what they would do if they were discovered. Jake looked at her and said they would adapt like they always did. Humans were good at improvising. It was one of their greatest strengths. The operation began at midnight station time when most of the staff were sleeping. Helen's ship attacked a Council patrol on the far side of Terminus. It looked like a pirate raid, and the Council scrambled fighters to respond. Nick activated his jamming equipment and suddenly half the station's communication systems went dark. In the confusion, Jake's shuttle slipped through the maintenance port. Sam and his team moved through the ventilation shafts like shadows. They were all small and flexible people who could squeeze through tight spaces. They carried no weapons because weapons would show up on scanners. Instead, they carried tools that looked like maintenance equipment. To any camera that happened to catch a glimpse, they were just glitches in the system. Jake led his group through the corridors using a map that Lisa had created from stolen blueprints. They passed technicians and guards and cleaning robots. None of them reacted to the humans walking by. The universe still insisted that humans did not exist, and so the people of the galaxy saw nothing, even when they looked directly at Jake's team. The archive was protected by layers of security, locked doors and armed guards and scanning systems that would trigger alarms if they detected unauthorized access. But the security was designed to stop people who existed in normal reality. Jake and his team existed outside those rules. They walked through scanner beams that registered nothing. They stood beside guards who never noticed them. They opened doors that recorded no entry. Inside the archive, Lisa had told them to look for a specific data core. It was a crystalline storage device that contained compressed information from 3 million years of Council history. Jake found it mounted in a chamber that glowed with soft blue light. He carefully disconnected the core and placed it in a shielded container. The extraction should have been simple, but nothing ever went perfectly. As they were leaving, a council member entered the archive unexpectedly. It was a tall being with silver skin and too many eyes. The being looked directly at Jake, and for a moment Jake thought they had been discovered. But the council member simply walked past him as if he were not there. The universe protected its own rules even when those rules made no sense. They made it back to the shuttle and escaped while Helen was still fighting the patrol. Nick stopped jamming and the station systems came back online. By the time anyone checked the archive, Jake was halfway across the star system. The council would know something had happened. The data core was missing, and there was no explanation for how it vanished. But they would find no evidence and no suspects because the suspects did not officially exist. Lisa received the data core with tears in her eyes. This was everything she had hoped for. Proof of every crime the council had committed. Evidence that would destroy their authority if it ever became public. The question was how to use it without revealing that humans were still alive. She decided to release the information slowly through her network of allies. Then the journalist would publish articles based on anonymous leaks. Cora the politician would demand investigations. Milo the teacher would share the truth with students. The information would spread like a virus through the galaxy, and the council would not be able to stop it because they would not know where it came from. Meanwhile, the survivors continued their work. They sabotaged mining operations that destroyed inhabited worlds. They freed slaves from council-approved labor camps. They smuggled weapons to rebels fighting for independence. They attacked every weak point in the council's empire, and they did it without leaving traces. The galaxy was changing. More species were questioning council authority. Trade routes that had been stable for millennia were disrupted by mysterious pirate attacks. Technologies that were supposed to be forbidden appeared on primitive worlds. Rebellions broke out on a dozen council-controlled planets. The careful order that had lasted 3 million years was falling apart. Council security forces investigated every incident but found nothing. Their best analysts studied the patterns and saw coordination, but could identify no coordinator. It was as if an invisible hand was systematically dismantling their civilization. Some council members began to whisper about ghosts and curses. Others insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Councillor Genthar of the Velthrian Empire was head of security, and he took the situation personally. He was a being of logic and reason, and he did not believe in ghosts. There had to be an explanation for the anomalies. He began a deep investigation into every unexplained incident over the past 20 years. He pulled records and analyzed data and looked for connections. What he found troubled him greatly. The incidents had started exactly at the same time. 20 years ago, something had changed in the galaxy. The timeline matched something else. Something the council did not like to discuss. Something that had been authorized by emergency vote and kept classified at the highest levels. Genthar accessed the sealed records of the revision protocol deployment. He read about the decision to erase humanity. He studied the reports that said the erasure had been complete and successful. But if the erasure was successful, why did the anomalies begin on the exact day it was deployed? He began to suspect an impossible truth. Somehow humanity had survived. Councillor Genthar stood in his private office staring at data that should not exist. He had spent 3 months investigating the anomalies, and every piece of evidence pointed to the same impossible conclusion. Humanity had survived the revision protocol. Somehow they were still out there operating in the shadows and tearing apart everything the council had built. He pulled up security footage from dozens of incidents. The images were corrupted with static and glitches, but if he looked carefully he could see patterns, shapes that might be people, movements that suggested coordination, doors opening with no one visible passing through them. It was subtle, but it was there. Genthar accessed the oldest council archives, the ones that required special authorization. He found records of previous revision protocol deployments. Each time the weapon was used, anomalies persisted for decades afterward. Echoes of the erased civilizations, ghosts that refused to stay dead. The council had always dismissed these as minor glitches in reality that would fade over time. But this was different. These anomalies were organized. They had purpose and strategy. They were not random glitches. They were actions taken by survivors who had learned to exist outside normal reality. He discovered something else in the ancient records. The council had not always ruled the galaxy. 3 million years ago, they had been just another group of species struggling to survive. Then they found technology left behind by an even older civilization. Technology that could reshape reality itself. They used it to erase their enemies and competitors. They used the revision protocol to become the supreme power. The weapon had been used 17 times in Council history. 17 civilizations erased because they posed a threat or asked too many questions or simply existed in the wrong place. Each time the Council told themselves it was necessary for the greater good. Each time they promised it would be the last time. Each time they were wrong, Genthar felt something he had not felt in centuries. Shame. His species had joined the Council believing they were maintaining peace and order. He had served faithfully for 800 years thinking he was protecting the galaxy. Now he realized he had been protecting an empire built on genocide. He found a reference to something called anchor stones in the historical records. They were relics from the civilization that existed before the current universe. The stones existed outside normal spacetime and could not be affected by the revision protocol. Previous erased civilizations had left behind survivors who possessed these stones. The survivors always caused problems for a generation or two before dying out. But humanity was different. The records showed that a human archaeologist had discovered a large cache of anchor stones and distributed fragments across dozens of colonies. When the protocol was deployed, thousands of humans were protected by the stones. That was far more survivors than any previous erasure had produced. Genthar realized that humanity had enough survivors to maintain their civilization in shadow form. They had the numbers to coordinate operations. They had the resources to sustain themselves. They had the knowledge to fight back. For 20 years they had been waging an invisible war and the Council had been losing. He needed proof. He needed something physical that he could show to the other Council members. He reviewed the reports from the archive theft at Terminus. The stolen data core had simply vanished with no explanation. Guards saw nothing. Cameras recorded nothing, but someone had to have taken it. He ordered a deep scan of the archive chamber using equipment that detected quantum anomalies. The results showed traces of something that should not exist. Residual energy signatures that matched nothing in the database. Footprints in reality left by beings who technically were not real. Then he got lucky. A human sabotage team hit a weapons facility on the edge of Council space. The operation went smoothly, but as they were escaping, one of them dropped something. It was small and crystalline, and it glowed with a faint blue light. Security forces recovered it before it could fade away. Genthar had the object brought to him immediately. He held it in his hands and felt reality shift around him. The anchor stone fragment was warm and it hummed with energy that existed outside normal physics. When he touched it, he could see things that should not be there. Shadows at the edge of his vision. Whispers in languages that were erased. Ghosts of a civilization that refused to die. He ran every test he could think of. The stone existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously. It was both matter and energy and something else entirely. It created a bubble of stable reality around itself that could not be altered by the revision protocol. Anyone holding this stone would be protected from erasure. Genthar understood now. The humans had distributed these stones before they were erased. When the protocol swept across the galaxy, everyone holding a stone fragment survived. They became paradoxes, beings that existed but should not exist. The universe said they were gone, but the stones said they were still here. The contradiction allowed them to slip through the cracks of reality. He calculated how many humans might have survived. If the archaeologist distributed fragments to major colonies and research stations, there could be anywhere from 5,000 to 15,000 survivors. That was enough to maintain an organization, enough to coordinate attacks, enough to slowly destroy the Council from within. Genthar compiled all his evidence into a report. Security footage showing glitches that were actually invisible people. Statistical analysis proving the anomalies were coordinated. Historical records showing the pattern of previous protocol failures. Quantum scans of the anchor stone proving its properties. Everything pointed to one conclusion. He called for an emergency council session. The 7 elder species gathered in the grand chamber at Terminus. They were annoyed at being summoned without warning, but Genthar had the authority to demand their presence. He presented his findings methodically. He showed them the evidence piece by piece. He explained how humanity had survived and what they had been doing for 20 years. He demonstrated the anchor stone and its properties. He made the case that could not be denied. The council members reacted with disbelief and anger. Some accused him of seeing patterns that did not exist. Others said he was being paranoid. A few demanded that he be removed from his position for spreading conspiracy theories. But Genthar had prepared for this. He showed them the statistical analysis. Food production in council territories had decreased by 18% over 20 years. Trade routes were disrupted by pirate attacks that appeared coordinated, even though no organization claimed responsibility. 3 of the 7 council species were experiencing internal rebellions. All of this had started exactly 20 years ago on the day the revision protocol was deployed. The chamber fell silent as the council members absorbed the implications. If humanity had survived and had been fighting them for 20 years, what did that mean for the future? Genthar delivered the final piece of information. Based on his analysis of attack patterns and resource distribution, humanity would reach critical mass within 5 years. They would have enough allies and enough bases and enough weapons to launch an open war. A war that the Council could not win against an enemy that officially did not exist. Archon Vel, the eldest council member who had proposed using the protocol on humanity, spoke for the first time. He asked if Genthar was certain of his conclusions. Genthar said he was as certain as he could be given that he was tracking ghosts. The Council debated for hours. Some wanted to deploy the revision protocol again to try erasing the survivors. Others pointed out that the protocol had already failed once and might fail again. A few suggested opening negotiations, but others said you cannot negotiate with beings that do not exist. Genthar listened to the arguments and realized that the Council was trapped by their own actions. They had tried to eliminate a problem and instead created a much bigger problem. They had turned humanity into the perfect enemy. Invisible, determined, and growing stronger every day. He made a suggestion that shocked the chamber. What if they reversed the protocol? What if they restored humanity to existence? The survivors would rejoin their species and the invisible war would end. The Council could negotiate from a position of strength before humanity grew strong enough to destroy them. Some council members called him a traitor. Others said it was the only logical option. The debate would continue for months, but Genthar knew the truth. The Council had already lost. They just had not admitted it yet. Humanity had done the impossible. They had survived extinction and built a resistance from nothing. They had proven that you cannot erase determination and courage and the will to survive. The Council wanted a universe without humans, but what they got was a universe where humans were everywhere and nowhere, fighting for freedom in the shadows. Genthar returned to his office and looked at the anchor stone fragment on his desk. He wondered if the humans knew how close they were to victory. He wondered if they would accept peace if it was offered. He wondered if the galaxy would survive what was coming. One thing was certain. The age of the Council was ending and nothing could stop it. The Council debated for 3 months while the galaxy continued to fall apart around them. Every day brought new reports of rebellions and sabotage and mysterious attacks. The empire that had stood for 3 million years was crumbling and the Council could not stop it because they could not fight an enemy. They could not. See, some council members wanted to deploy the revision protocol again. They argued that if they erased the survivors, the problem would be solved. Others pointed out that the protocol had already failed once and using it again might make things worse. A few suggested accepting defeat and abandoning their territories. The debates went in circles with no resolution. While the Council argued, Lisa Grant prepared the final phase of humanity's plan. She had waited 20 years for this moment. She had built a network that spanned the galaxy. She had gathered evidence of every crime the Council had committed. She had coordinated thousands of operations and never made a critical mistake. Now it was time to end this. She sent a message through the Anchorstone network to every human survivor. The time had come to reveal themselves, not as physical beings but as voices that could not be silenced. They would broadcast the truth to every corner of the galaxy and let the people decide what came. Next, Jake Morrison received the message aboard the Horizon's Edge. He gathered his crew and explained what was about to happen. They had spent 20 years as ghosts. They had fought and bled and died in a war that officially never happened. Now the galaxy would finally know they existed. Amy Chen asked if they would be safe once the truth came out. Jake told her honestly that he did not know. They might be hunted. They might be celebrated. They might still be ignored by a universe that insisted they should not exist. But it did not matter. The truth needed to be told regardless of the consequences. Lisa began the broadcast at midnight Galactic Standard Time. She used the Anchorstone network to create a quantum resonance that touched every living mind in the galaxy. It was not sound or light or any normal form of communication. It was a vibration in the fabric of reality itself. Every being capable of thought received her message simultaneously. She told the story of humanity, how they had explored the stars with wonder and curiosity, how they had made friends with dozens of species, how they had asked questions that the Council did not want answered, how the Council had voted to erase them from existence rather than allow them to exist freely. She showed the evidence. Images of the Council meetings where the decision was made, records of the 17 previous civilizations that had been erased, proof that the Forbidden Zones were not dangerous but simply resource-rich areas the Council wanted for themselves, documentation of suppressed technologies that could have helped billions of people. Everything the Council had hidden was laid bare. She explained how humanity had survived through the Anchorstones, how they had existed as paradoxes for 20 years, how they had fought back against injustice while invisible, how every mysterious incident and unexplained sabotage had been humans trying to free the galaxy from tyranny. The broadcast lasted for 3 hours. Lisa spoke calmly and clearly. She did not exaggerate or dramatize. She simply presented the facts and let them speak for themselves. She ended with a simple statement. Humanity had been erased but refused to stay gone. They had survived because survival was what humans did best. They had fought because fighting oppression was right. They were still here and they would never give up. The galaxy erupted. On every world that received the broadcast, people took to the streets. Some were angry at the Council for lying to them. Others were inspired by humanity's refusal to die. Many were terrified of what this meant for the future. The careful order that had existed for millions of years shattered in a single night. Council forces tried to suppress the information, but it was impossible. The broadcast had not used technology that could be shut down. It had touched minds directly through quantum resonance. Everyone knew the truth now, and that truth could not be erased. Allied species withdrew their support from the Council. Younger civilizations demanded answers and apologies. Rebellions that had been simmering for decades boiled over into open warfare. The Empire collapsed faster than anyone thought possible. Counselor Genthar watched the chaos from his office at Terminus. He had known this was coming, but seeing it happen was still overwhelming. He made a decision that would be considered treason by his fellow Council members. He accessed the revision protocol controls using his security clearance. He entered the command codes that only he knew. He deactivated the weapon completely. Reality shuddered. Across the galaxy, quantum locks released. The protocol that had kept humanity erased for 20 years suddenly stopped functioning. The paradox resolved itself. The universe stopped insisting that humans did not exist. Earth appeared in the star charts. Not as a new discovery, but as a world that had always been there. Billions of humans who had been erased suddenly existed again. They remembered their entire history, including their expansion into space. They remembered signing treaties and building colonies and exploring the unknown. But they did not remember being erased because for them, it had never happened. Only the survivors who had carried Anchorstone fragments remembered the 20 years of erasure. To everyone else, humanity had existed continuously, from the dawn of their species to the present day. The timeline had been restored. Jake stood on the bridge of his ship and watched Earth appear on his view screen for the first time in 2 decades. His crew stood with him in silence. They were no longer ghosts. They were real again. They could be seen and touched and recorded. The universe acknowledged their existence. Amy was crying, but she was smiling. Helen sent a message through normal communication channels, and it worked perfectly. Nick laughed with relief. Greg started planning legitimate trade routes. Sam talked about retiring and going home. Everyone felt the weight of 20 years of invisible war lift from their shoulders. But Jake knew the work was not finished. The Council was in chaos. Their authority was broken. Their crimes were exposed. But chaos could be dangerous. The galaxy needed stability and guidance. It needed someone to help build something better. Messages flooded in from across the galaxy. Species that humanity had helped during the Invisible War wanted to thank them. Rebels who had received mysterious support wanted to meet their benefactors. Leaders who had always suspected something was wrong wanted to form alliances. The Council called for a meeting. Not to dictate terms, but to negotiate. For the first time in 3 million years, they were asking for help instead of demanding obedience. Genthar sent a personal message to Lisa requesting dialogue. He admitted the Council's crimes. He offered to share all their knowledge and resources. He asked for a chance to build something better together. Lisa considered the offer carefully. Humanity had lost 20 years. They had suffered and struggled and fought alone. Many survivors would never forgive the Council for what was done to them. But revenge would not rebuild the galaxy. Cooperation might. She accepted the meeting on one condition. The Council must dismantle completely. The 7 elder species could participate in a new galactic government, but they would not rule it. Every species would have an equal voice. Every decision would be made collectively. The age of the Council was over. The negotiations took months, but eventually an agreement was reached. A new federation was formed with representatives from hundreds of species. Humanity was given a prominent role because they had proven they would fight for freedom, even when it cost them everything. Jake Morrison was offered a position as an admiral in the new Federation fleet. He accepted because someone needed to protect the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. Amy became a diplomat. Helen led a scientific council. Nick trained security forces. Lisa continued her research, but now she worked openly with scholars from across the galaxy. The survivors of the erasure became legends. They were the people who had refused to die. They were the ghosts who saved the galaxy. They were proof that determination and courage could overcome any obstacle. Years passed and the galaxy healed. The resources from the Forbidden Zones were shared equally. The suppressed technologies were released and developed. Species that had been held back were allowed to flourish. The universe became a better place because humanity had refused to let it remain the same. Jake stood on Earth looking up at the stars. He was an old man now. His hair was white and his hands shook, but his mind was still sharp. He thought about everything humanity had endured. The erasure, the survival, the invisible war, the restoration, the rebuilding. He thought about the Council's original goal. They had wanted a universe without humans. They had tried to erase humanity because they were afraid of what humans might become. In the end, they had been right to be afraid. Humans had become exactly what they feared. Humanity had become the force that could not be stopped or controlled or defeated. But the Council had been wrong about one thing. A universe without humans was not better. It was emptier. It was colder. It lacked the spark of determination that pushed civilizations forward. Humanity had proven that even extinction could not stop them. They had survived and adapted and thrived. The galaxy was better because humans existed. The Council had learned that lesson too late. But they had learned it. And now everyone would build the future together as equals. Jake smiled as he watched ships arrive and depart from Earth's orbital stations. Humans and aliens working side by side, trading and learning and exploring together. This was what the galaxy should have been all along. The Council had wanted to erase humanity. Instead, they had given humanity the ultimate test. And humanity had passed. They had proven that some things could never be erased. Hope could not be erased. Courage could not be erased. The will to survive could not be erased. Humanity was here to stay and the universe was better for it.